You know, most people think success in business starts with credentials, experience, or a perfectly polished resume. But sometimes it starts with none of those things. Welcome, or hopefully welcome back to The Reluctant Entrepreneur. I'm Mike Conrad. My guest today, Dennis Dowdell, did not begin his journey as the obvious business success candidate. His own website describes his path as beginning behind the wheel of a school bus before he went on to develop the skills, discipline, and leadership ability to help build a worldwide team of more than 250,000 people. That kind of transformation does not happen by accident. It happens when someone decides that where they start does not have to determine where they finish. Today, Dennis is the founder of Maximize You, where his message is that people can start where they are and develop a plan to maximize their potential, regardless of age, background, or even ability. In this conversation, we'll talk about Dennis's unlikely journey, the lessons he learned about leadership and personal growth, and why building yourself may be the most important step before building a business, a team, or a future you can be proud of. And this all begins right now. Stick around. This is going to be good. Hey, Dennis, welcome to the show. I'm really excited to have this conversation today.
Well, Mike, I'm just thrilled to be here and just what you're doing for people and your audience. I mean, this is very, very exciting.
Well, it's not possible without great guests who can share their journey. So I thank you in advance. You didn't begin your journey with let's say, a polished business resume. You were driving a school bus, at the very, very, very early days. Take us back to the beginning. What did life look like before you stepped into business leadership and entrepreneurship?
Well, when I graduated from college, and I barely graduated from college.
1.98 is what I read, right?
1.98 average, I studied people more than classes, so that was the benefit. But when I graduated, I didn't want to go out and just get a job. And I wanted to be able to find a career where I could get started, find something that I really love to do, and then just stay with it for the rest of my life, build it, and help build a company. And and I know today's strategy is a lot different. People go out, they graduate, they get their job and they work 5 or 6 years and they get some experience and then they use that experience to level up and work another 5 or 6 years and then level up and and go like this, job to job to job. I've never really thought that was a good plan for me personally. And so I thought, well, if I took some time and really searched it out, then maybe I could find something that I could really get behind. And that's why I ended up driving a school bus to begin with. Because that way I could take the kids to school in the morning, pick them up in the afternoon. I had off in the middle of the day where I could go, search. And so I started in, and then I kind of sloughed off, being lazy like I was. And I was coming up on my 30th birthday, Mike. And I started thinking, I said, golly, if I don't get on with this thing, man, it's never going to happen. Because, you get comfortable, you get into a rhythm, a routine, and then that's how life is. Yep. And then pretty soon I said, listen, this isn't the kind of lifestyle I want to have. And if I want to create the lifestyle I want, I better get busy. And so there was 2 things I wanted in a career. I wanted to be able to make a difference for people. And I wanted to be able to travel the world. And so I started searching diligently. Every day I was out there. And it still took me 7 months before I ran into a startup company in the nutrition industry. The company was 4 months old. And,
I'm assuming that was Herbalife?
Yeah, it's Herbalife. Herbalife International, founded by Mark Hughes. And in fact, what's interesting is I literally turned down 2 jobs that would have paid me 30% more than I was looking for. And, the money was tempting, but my purpose was stronger than the money. And I thought, no, I'm not going to do that. I'm going to do what I plan to do, what I want to do. And So anyway, I went up there and I thought I was going up for a one-on-one interview. And instead, he crammed me in this little presentation room with 70 people, big enough for 40. And I'm thinking, man, what am I doing here? And, so they talked about the products, and that made sense. Nutrition, health, weight loss, and energy. And I thought, okay, well, that's good. People want to lose weight, and everybody wants to have energy and feel good. So, okay, I like that. But then they started drawing squares and circles on the board explaining, the compensation. And I think, oh, no, this is some kind of sales. I hate sales.
Yeah.
I don't like sales. I don't want sales. I'm not doing sales, right? And so I said, I'm out of here. Fortunately for me, the room was so crowded I couldn't get out. And at the end of the presentation, Mark came up to me, the founder, and he said, well, what do you think? And I said, well, listen, you got great product. Very excited for you. I'm excited. But listen, I just don't like sales. And I said, I don't like sales. I don't want to do sales. And the reason I stuck around afterwards is because when he closed that presentation, last 5 minutes, he got up and he said, gang, here's what we're going to do. We're going to go out and we're going to make a difference, right? Customer by customer, city by city, state by state, and we're going around the world. And I said, whoa, that's my 2 requirements.
Yeah.
Make a difference, travel the world. And I said, so my ears are open. Okay, I'm going to stay. I got to talk. I got to find out how this actually works then. And I tell him I don't like sales. And he said, don't you work with college kids? And I said, yeah. He'd looked at my resume. And he said, well, what do you do for them? And I said, I'm just like a mentor, a coach. And I said, I just help them, deal with problems. And he said, well, what kind of problems? I said, all kinds of problems, family problems, school problems, relation problems. And he says, well, do they have weight problems? I said, Mark, they're in college. I said, have you never heard of the freshman 15, the freshman 30? You're out on your own, you eat what you want and you get fat, right? And I said, of course they have weight problems. He said, well, do they have financial problems? I said, Mark, they're in college.
Yeah.
I said, of course they all got college, finance problems.
Shooting fish in a barrel at that point. Yeah.
Yeah, and so anyway, then he just said, he says, now you've got 2 more problems to solve. He said, Denny, you don't have to sell anything. You just have to help people solve a problem they have up to this point in time never been able to solve before. Now, I'd heard that idea before, but the penny dropped. That's when it became real, because now for the first time it applied to me and it applied to what I could do. And I thought, that's it. And I loved solving problems. So that's really where I got started. I didn't know anything about nutrition. I didn't know anything about business. I had no business background whatsoever. But I had the product, I had the plan, and I had myself. And that was the deal. And so I said, okay, I had a friend of mine who needed to lose weight. I thought, I'm going to have them try it first. And if it works for her, at least that way I know the product is a good deal, right? Well, before I got it to her, I lived in a house with 6 guys. And my roommate saw this product sitting on the kitchen table that I got from my friend who was overweight, right? And he said, hey, Dowdell, he said, what's for the box? And I said, it's some products for a friend of mine. She needs to lose some weight. And I said, I'm just kind of checking in this company. And he said, lose weight? He said, why don't you let me try it? And I looked at him. I said, for what? And he said, no, I just want to get rid of these love handles. I said, dude, are you crazy? I said, man, if you're serious, cash on the table, Jack. I left. I came back a few hours later. The box was gone. The money was there. And I said, oh, Christ, now I need to get another one.
Sure.
Because I'd already talked to my friend. The next day, his girlfriend calls me up and says, hey, Denny, he said, Ken says you got a great new weight loss product. I said, well, I don't know. I'm kind of checking into it. She says, tell me about it. I said, I don't know anything about it. And she says, well, how do you use it? I said, heck, I don't know. Ask Ken. He's using it. I'm not. She says, never mind. Just get one for him. In fact, get one for my roommate. We'll do it together. And I'm just thinking, okay, this is crazy, right? An hour and a half later, I get another phone call. Hey, Denny, this is Kathy. I just got off the phone with Jan. She says, you've got this great new weight loss product. And I just started laughing. And I said, yeah, it sounded better all the time. And she says, tell me about it. And I said, Kath, I don't know anything about it. When I hang up, I'm going to find that book they gave me and read it, right? I never read the book, right? But she still wanted the product. And I took it to her, and she said, take it to my dad's. He can bring it to me on his way home. I go over to her dad's office, who's an intelligent guy, worked real close to me. And he says, well, let me see it. And he looks at it, and he starts reading the label. I have no idea what I'm giving his daughter. And the guy said, Denny, this looks like really good stuff. It's got this in there and that in there. I didn't have a clue what was in there. And he said, why don't you get one of these for me and the wife? And I said, okay. I said, that's it. And what went through my mind is, I can do this. And that's a huge step before anyone wants to, start out in a business for themselves. It's got to be simple enough. It's got to be clear enough. But the most important thing is it's got to get into your head that you can do this. And when I saw how that worked, and I didn't know anything, I said, man, I can do this. Because if I start learning something, I'll do even better. And so that's really what it was. I just started step by step. And fortunately, the founder of the company became one of my first major mentors. And I was smart enough to listen. I'm smart enough to, say, okay, I'm going to pay attention to somebody who knows better than I do. And this guy had the passion, the conviction, the direction, the vision. I mean, he was talking about going around the world. Mike, we hadn't left Los Angeles yet, so that's what I did. And so I just started step by step. I got results on the product. And then I just started learning and I started practicing, and I had a major failure rate. I could talk to one or talk to 20 and get one. But I just kept going, and people started asking me questions. I didn't know anything about nutrition, and I couldn't get to the trainings because they were an hour from my house. I couldn't afford the gas to get up there. I was broke. And so people would ask me questions, and I'd say, listen, to be honest with you, I said, I really don't know. I said, I got results. My friend got results. If you want results, you try it. And that was it. And I just kind of took it. And so as people got results, then what that did is that developed my confidence and conviction about the products. And then I started making money. And I thought, son of a gun. And I worked part-time for about a little over a year, before I was actually making more money part-time than I was full-time. And then that's when I thought, this really is amazing. And so I started going, and I still struggle. Mike, I remember I was in an office. We had little tables that we put around the room, and we had our phones plugged in, and everybody had their own little table and phone instead of our own office, and to split the costs on this thing. And I remember walking into the office one Monday morning, and I got my phone bill, and I had no money. And I mean, if I don't get this phone paid by the end of the day, my phone's off. And if my phone's off,
yeah, there goes your business. Yeah, sure.
I'm gone, And so I said, well, I can sit here and cry and complain, or I can get out there and hustle and find a way to get some money. And so I literally went out and I literally went door to door. I hated the idea, but I literally, door to door business, person to person. And by the end of the day, I paid my phone bill. And I said, I did it. Yeah. And I got back. And so accomplishing that gave me a little bit more confidence to go, to keep moving. Yeah. And, and it's really interesting because a lot of people think you need to have competence in order to get confidence, and I say, no, you need confidence to get competence. Competence comes first. Competence comes second.
Yeah.
And that was real valuable for me. See, because I had confidence in the product. I had confidence in the plan. I didn't have much confidence in me, because I still had so much to learn. But it was just like trial and error, and then talking to people who succeeded.
Well, you discovered firsthand the old standby rule of sales. You mentioned you talk to 20 people, you get one order. Want to double your orders? Figure out a way to talk to 40 people. And then want to double it again? Figure out a way to talk to 80 people. And at some point, your ratio will improve, right?
So that's it, because, you talk to 20 and you get one, but you talk to another 20, you get to 40 and you find out maybe in the second group of 20, you got two.
By the way, I do find that I've never hired I'm not as involved in the day-to-day operations of my company now. I'm kind of semi-retired. I still own it, but they pay me to stay away. When I was very involved, we'd hire salespeople, throughout the years. I never hired a salesperson that was a salesperson. I became infatuated with people who would say, I don't want sales. I want to do this instead. I'm like, why don't you want sales? I hate salesmen. Like, oh my God, I got to hire you. Yeah, that's the kind of person I want. Someone who doesn't consider themselves a salesperson. And
They're real.
they're real. I would take someone that had like a service technician. They make great salespeople, right? Because they
Yeah.
don't respect the stereotypical view of a salesperson, and they're problem solvers, and they're fixers, and they're pleasers if they're a good service person.
So that was why that first principle that I learned, the fact that, I'm not selling anything, I'm just solving problems. And so you tell me your problem, I'll give you my solution. If you don't like my solution, you keep your problem, I'll keep my product, we're both happy.
Yeah,
And but if I can help you solve your problem, then it's win-win. And I always loved that. I never pressured anybody, to get the product or even to become a part of my team. Because and then I would tell them, I said, listen, I know what I can do, but what can you do? What do you bring into the table here? You
yeah,
know, what have you got to offer? And when I look for people, I didn't care what their background was. In a instance like yourself, there's only two things I ever look for in a person. I want to know what's your desire, and what are your work habits. I can train somebody to do anything, especially what I've done and what I'm good at. But if they got the desire and the work habits, now all I have to do is give them the process,
sure.
and they're going to do real well.
Yeah.
They're going to do real well.
You've talked about you weren't the best student at your university, 1.98 GPA, and you were driving a school bus for a while. Then you were working, at least at the beginning, part time with Herbalife. When did you first realize that where you started did not have to determine where you finished?
I think I got that pretty early on, because I knew what I needed to do was find people smarter and better than me. And the founder of our company was a ninth grade educated dropout. Got in trouble with the law. The judge said you can either go to juvie or you can go to the rehab center. And he chose the rehab center and had some mentors himself that taught him work habits, taught him integrity, taught him drive, character development, and it stuck. It was embedded into this kid, and he just overflowed, with this kind of character and drive and passion. And so that was that gave me hope from the very beginning, because I just realized all I've got to do is find some people, get them plugged into the product and the plan, and then just work on them as an individual. And that's what I discovered, is it was the individual that made the difference, because we all have the same product, we all have the same plan. And, you go through things, and you're always going to encounter problems, but problems are essential to progress. One of the overriding themes that Mark would tell us, he said, everything, no matter what it was, everything was no problem. The lights went off, no problem. Projector broke, no problem. Nobody showed up, no problem. Everything was a no problem attitude. It didn't mean there weren't problems. Just meant there wasn't the focus of the problem. So he got that drilled into our heads straight away. He said, if you have any problems, leave them at the front door. They'll wait for you. You can pick them up on the way out.
They'll be there. Yeah, sure. Yeah.
When you come in, there's no problems. And the problem, the idea was you to spend 5% of the time on the problems, 95% on the solution, because there's a solution to everything. We may not have it right now. It may take a while to create it and find it, but there's always a solution, one way or the other. There could be a change of direction, could be a change of process, but we'll find it. And so we did that. And I remember in 1985, the first, really 5 years of the company, we exploded. Mike, we literally became the fastest growing company in American business history. Our growth rate was 512,000 some odd 100% growth. It was radical, right? So we were like this, just going straight up. And And then in 1985, we ended up getting some bad publicity. You know,
You and
because,
all the other MLMs out there, right? They
oh
all
my God,
got put into the same
bomb.
garbage heap in terms of societal impressions and press and things like that, right?
Oh yeah. I mean, I learned to get past all people's negative image of MLM. Okay. I could get past that.
And for
But
my audience that doesn't know what that is, multi-level marketing, just
right,
throwing acronyms
right.
out. Yeah.
Yes, that's true. Very good. But anyway, I mean, when this hit, you know, people were getting such great results. The pharmaceutical industry says you got to have drugs in those things. So the pharmaceutical industry went to the AMA, and the AMA went to the FDA, and the FDA came knocking on our door.
Yeah, I remember that.
And so we went through it. I mean, we literally we went from 104 million to about 8 or 9 million a month in 3 months. I mean, it was crashed. My personal business, okay, my personal business dropped 86% in 3 months.
Wow.
And now you want to talk about problems, okay? Uh, the problems hit, you know, the attack hit March 8th. On March 1st, I closed escrow on my first $1 million home. I hadn't even made my first payment yet.
Wow. Wow. Timing,
So,
Dennis. Timing. Yeah.
and then this thing hit, and it was just like crash, right? And so, you know, most people will say that's a problem, you know, and but it was so embedded into me for 5 years that I just said, no problem, we're going to figure it out. And it was tough, you know, because they attacked us. They attacked the company. They attacked the products. They attacked the distributors. They attacked everything. I mean, it was unbelievable. And we were, I mean, it was headline news. They would, you know,
Oh, I
headline
remember.
Mark Hughes in the news again. Tune in at 6 o'clock on
Yeah.
ABC, CBS, radio, TV, everything. Right? I mean, everywhere you look, we were getting bombed. And so, you know, I thought, okay, one of the things that I learned early on, you know, is when things happen, you know, I can focus on all the problems, or again, I can focus on the solutions. So I'm looking at this and I'm saying, okay, so how do I apply this? What am I going to do? I mean, listen, I mean, I'm making less than my mortgage payment now, much less everything else,
Yeah.
right? So I said, okay, the solution has to do with me. Okay. Circumstances, you know, I have no control over that, but I do have control over how I respond to them. The problem isn't the problem, it's how I respond to it. So I started thinking, okay, and the problem is everything that had changed. So I thought, okay, so then what hasn't changed? And so I started really zeroing in on that. The product hadn't changed, the plan hadn't changed, the need hadn't changed, the purpose hadn't changed, my purpose hadn't changed, my drive hadn't changed, right? My commitment hadn't changed, my dream hadn't changed, I hadn't changed. And so I said, okay, I just have to continue on with my purpose and just talk to twice as many people, run twice as many ads, you know, do twice as much marketing, you know. And so and I did. I just poured it on. People would come in and fortunately, you know, the bad news and the good news. Fortunately, I had this brand new, you know, $1 million home.
There's motivation.
And so people, and I used to interview people at my home. So I'd say, hey, listen, if there was such a big problem, you think I'd be staying in this house?
There you go.
So
Good point.
I just had to take what I did have to create what I didn't have.
Yeah.
And you know, it took me about 14 months to bring it back up close to even, you know, and then we plowed through, you know, to continue on, and then eventually, you know, it grew. But you know what happened, and it was the 2020 hindsight of the advantage, and that was when that happened. I used to tell people, oh, you know, I bleed green, I bleed Herbalife, I love, and you know, but when the problems hit, then I found out who was really loyal. I found
Right.
out those who were committed to the cash and those who were committed to the cause. And so by the time that finished, I had a powerful group of very cause-oriented people who were still willing to work for the purpose and the dream of making a difference for people. So I had a powerful group of people then to work with. And those people are still with me today, you know?
Interesting.
So, I
Are
mean,
you
it's just been amazing.
are you still involved with Herbalife, or have you moved
Yeah, I
on
still do
completely from
trainings.
there?
I mean, I don't recruit. I mean, you can't not sell products if somebody's got a health issue. I'm not.
Right.
How can I not tell them about it? You know.
Right.
But I don't do any recruiting. I haven't recruited in 20 years.
Interesting.
But I do training. I mean, I did their big annual extravaganza at AT&T Stadium, last summer. So I still do that kind of stuff. Yeah.
Was there a moment in your earlier career when you thought, I may not be qualified for this, but chose to move forward anyway? I know you were not a salesman, so there's part of that answer, right? You're not a salesman. You don't want to be a salesman. Don't want anything to do with sales. And look at you now. But were there other things that you thought maybe a little imposter syndrome, or you were over your head, but just plowed forward anyway?
Yeah, I think there's constantly that process of being over your head, and and especially as it grew and it was so big. But so you figure out a way to solve your problem. So what I did was I just tried to recruit and find people smarter than me and put them in charge. And so it just worked out real well. And so ultimately, what I was always in the process of doing was putting myself out of a job. And I would tell them. I mean, it got to be a part of my recruiting presentation. I said, listen, I'm not hiring a partner. I'm not hiring my best friend. I said, I'm looking for my replacement. It's kind of like, the movie Men in Black.
Sure. Yeah. Yeah, sure.
He says, give me the gun. And at
Yeah.
the end, Tommy Lee turns to, the guy and he said, listen, he says, what do you mean you're just giving me the gun? And he said, when I hired you, I wasn't hiring, partners. I was hiring my replacement. And
Yeah.
so that was my idea. And I said, so when you know what I know and you can do what I do, then I don't have to do it anymore, but I still get paid.
Yeah.
And so that was my plus. And so what I did is I began very soon focus strictly on developing people. And because if I develop the people, then the people will develop the business and the plan and their life. I mean, think about it. You've got 10 people, you got 100 people, you got 1,000 people. They have the same product and the same plan. One makes 500, one makes 5,000, one makes 25,000. What's the difference? It's not the product. It's not the plan. It's what they learn to do with it.
Right.
So I just learned, I can teach them the product and the plan in a week. After that, I just spent all my time focusing on building them and teaching them how to deal with it, how to work with it, how to build themselves, how to get better. And
let's talk about that more.
The
Let's go down that rabbit hole a little bit. You talk about helping people. Your work focuses on helping people, and I'm going to put in air quotes for the listeners, maximize themselves. And I put that in air quotes because that obviously is the name of your company, Maximize You, I believe. What does that mean, maximize themselves in practical terms?
Well, it just means, being able to do the best that you possibly can in every area and every talent, skills, gift, and ability that you have, and learn how to respond to problems, respond to life, learning to make sense out of life, learning to make sense out of business, and so if I can focus on that part, teaching people, how to endure, teaching people how to become resilient. Teaching people how to press on, teaching people to have a bigger, create a bigger vision. Those are the kind of things that, have really helped. And then basically teaching them how to do the best they can at their talents, their skills, and their abilities. I don't want them to necessarily be good at what I'm good at. I want them to be good at what they're good at. And so that's really the idea. And there's, I developed a pyramid of potential, which is based on 6 steps. And it works for anyone everywhere, and especially as a young entrepreneur, because you've got to begin with your purpose. That determines, your decisions, your directions. It determines where you're going to spend your time, money, energy. It's the door to maximizing your potential, right? And so once you've got that down and you begin to realize, that's just the practical, that's the logistical understanding of purpose. But the mental understanding of purpose is to design your life around purpose, not pleasure. A lot of people say, my purpose is to create pleasure. No, your purpose is to fulfill your purpose. And when you fulfill your purpose, the pleasure will come, but it's making the purpose happen. And in order to do that, then the second step on the pyramid is personal development. I've got to become the person necessary to fulfill that purpose. So what talent, skills, gifts, and abilities do I need to learn and develop in order to make my dream come true? Okay? And if it doesn't help me to do that, it's out. Even if it's a good thing. We exchange, the bad for the good. See, and then people say, and that's what you want to do. But that's only for a little while. Then we need to learn to exchange the good for the better.
Mm-hmm.
And that's good for a while. And then we need to exchange the better for the best. What a lot of people don't realize, and where a lot of people get stuck in their entrepreneurial journey, is they exchange the bad for the good, and they'll even exchange the good for the better. But then they get comfortable with better.
Yeah, I went through that. Jim Collins' book, Good to Great, talks about
Yes.
exactly that thing, that good is the enemy of great. I remember when our company first started doing good, it was such a relief, Dennis, because we were not doing good the first few years, which many companies share that journey.
You do.
That by the time it worked so hard, we finally got the company doing good. I was afraid of trying to change that for better because I did not want to risk good for the chance of great. There was a comfort in doing good enough. There's a comfort in cash flows there. I mean, it's on the edge, but it's there. I don't have to keep making up excuses. I don't have to plead for extended terms. I don't have to threaten customers, pay us or we'll sue you, all that kind of stuff. Things were doing good. And I was so relieved. I just wanted to just do indefinite victory laps, right? And it was hard to say, okay, what's next? I'm like, I'm not ready for next. I still have PTSD from before. I don't want a chance going back there. And I think a lot of people, I think you have it exactly correct. So many people stop at good or better.
Yeah.
And they just don't even consider great. It's too scary.
And I think, and seeing that's why, where I work on the person, because, if things are going to change, you've got to change. If things are going to get better, you've got to get better. I don't have to focus on getting their business better. If I can help them to become better, become stronger, become more powerful, become more confident, to have a greater vision, it will be an overflow. It will overflow. So I just say, okay, just get better. You can make this happen. A lot of times, and this is a key phrase I use all the time. A lot of people say, well, if you've done this and you're better, you should do this so that you can be the best. And I learned just a slight twist on words, right? I tell my people, never say should. Replace all shoulds with coulds.
Yeah.
Instead of saying you should do this, I say, you could do that.
Yeah.
You could go there. You could make this happen. You could be that person. You could run this. You could go, international. You could. See, when you say should, people say, yeah, who are you to tell me? Or
Right.
why should I? And that's normally it's the why should I? But if you say
could is inspiration. Should is an instruction. Could is inspiration. That's the way I would view that, right?
Exactly.
Yeah.
And then what that says is, you mean you believe in me? And so when they see that you believe in them more than they believe in them, listen, that's what moved me forward. Mark told me one day, he said, you need to go open up Orange County. And I said, open up Orange County? I said, Mark, I'm trying to figure out how to open up the front door. What are you talking about? But his belief in me said, I guess I'm going to go. I'll do it, And we did. And we literally went from city to city, state to state, country to country.
Interesting.
But that's very, very powerful, just to, and all, it's one of the most encouraging things we can do is talk about what people could do and how we see them, you know.
We think in business that, our goal is to develop business skills. Well, okay, fair enough, right? On its own. However, you talk about developing people physically, mentally, and spiritually. How do
Right.
those three areas show up in business leadership?
Well, for me, I mean, listen, it's, we're human beings, not human doings. We're human beings. And so we consist of our spirit, our soul, and our body. And our spirit, that's that universal truth that, governs the decisions we make and helps us to discern right from wrong. The soul, the mind, will, and emotion, that's that part where life takes place. The mind listens to the spirit and determines, makes the decision as what they're going to do. The will then carries out that decision, and the emotions get the fruit of that decision. If I make good decisions, I get good fruit. If I make bad decisions, I get bad fruit. So, so that's it. So I need the mind, to tell the will what to do. The will carry it out. Not I'll try, I will, right? And then I get to enjoy the fruit of my labor. The body is simply the area, the vehicle that we've been given to live out our life. This is where we live. That Jim Rohn used to say, listen, you better take care of your body. It's the only one you got. There's no refunds and there's no replacements. And body parts are extremely, expensive if you can get them at all.
Yeah.
So you just take care of it. And so that's why we need to keep that balance between those things. And if we'll do that, then we build a life of integrity and character, and we get the greatest meaning, in life when we do that. If we, listen, we live in a community and a society and a culture that says if it feels good, do it, right? And so they put the body first, all the how I look and my, get fit and all that other stuff, which is vitally important. You got to, I mean, if you destroy your body by the time you're 50 and you're going to live to be 75, you got 25 years of hell coming up.
Yeah. Of course.
So that's just how it is. So if you build your body and then you build your mind and you're extremely smart and extremely intelligent and you're brightest in your class and you're the top of everything, right? But if you miss out and leave out the spiritual side, that gives you that moral compass, then you're only thinking, if you maxed out both of the physical and the mental, you're only operating at 66% of your potential. And who operates at 100%? Nobody. If we operated at 50% physical and mental, we'd only have 33% potential. So there's always room for growth. And we want to keep it balanced. And if you keep it in balance, then you have the greatest satisfaction and the greatest fulfillment, and you'll end up leaving the greatest legacy.
So what do you say to someone in this scenario? I remember, 3 decades ago when I was building my business, lots of problems in the business that I constantly had to solve. It turned out I caused all those problems. So I was the arsonist and the firefighter kind of all in one. But the saying goes, I don't have time to work on the important because I'm busy working on the urgent, right? Well, it's important to work on yourself. But you've stated that people should work harder on themselves than they do on their business, which makes sense. Although if someone is in the thick of it, how do you work with entrepreneurs who are overwhelmed with the daily problems, who say, I don't even have time to even eat, much less work mentally, physically, spiritually on myself?
It's a common event that happens to entrepreneurs, and especially in those early stages, because in the beginning we're doing pretty much of everything, we're controlling everything, and it's real easy to get overwhelmed. And so, what I do is I say, listen, you've got to stop. You say I don't have time, to rest. I don't have time to do this. You don't have time not to.
Right.
It's not an option. If you don't come apart from your business is going to come apart. And so, it's vital. So my thinking there is I said, okay, listen, let's come back down to your purpose. You got to come back to that initial purpose and the initial why. The purpose points you in the direction. The why is what gives you the endurance. So we got to come back to that initial purpose. Is what you're doing going to help you get what you want? And if it doesn't, it's out, even if it's a good thing. And the problem, and you said it earlier, it's the tyranny of the urgent, right?
Right.
I've got to get it done. Well, what happens if you don't get it done? What happens if you get in a car accident on the way home and you're in the hospital for the next week? Okay? So let's just say you can get in. It's not I don't have time. It's you don't make time.
Yeah.
Who's in charge here? Are the circumstances in charge or are you in charge? You got to take charge of your business. And you've got to be able to set up your priorities. And I mean, listen, if you could only do one thing today, I normally say one thing this year, one thing this quarter, one thing this month, one thing this week, one thing this day. If you could only do the one thing, what would the one thing be? Then you do that before you do anything else. Okay? And so you've got, and that's where you've got to set up the priorities as to what needs to be done, and then do that, and then set them in order. And if they don't get done, listen, all that it means is it may take you, 3 months instead of 1.
Right.
And we just have to accept that. Listen, I mean, I don't know about you, but nothing ever goes as planned.
Right. Right. If you want to, it's long been said, if you want to hear,
twice is wrong.
Yeah, it's often been said, if you want to hear God laugh, tell him your plans, right?
That's
So
I think that's really it, and I think that's where people get overwhelmed is they lose their priorities and they lose track of their purpose. And we've got to always keep those on the forefront, so that we can do that. And I mean, it all comes into to planning. I mean, it's just like the balance of our life. I mean, in other words, there's 7 areas in our life that we have to keep balanced. 7 areas in life that pretty well consume it all, and that's family, financial, personal, physical, professional, spiritual, and social. Everything fits under those 7 categories. Now, that doesn't mean they all get equal time. Priorities doesn't mean they get the same amount of time.
Right.
It's the value of each. I know so many entrepreneurs, and here's what happens. They've got this dream, they've got this vision, they've got the work ethic, they've got the drive. They get into overdrive. They're overwhelmed. Their family gets neglected. Their kids get neglected, and they've got this objective of creating a freedom and a lifestyle for their family. And at the end of 5-10 years, whatever it is, they've reached their goal, but they missed the objective because they're divorced and their kids don't want to spend time with them anymore. And so they reached the goal, but they missed the objective. And so we've got to make sure that that's why the priorities are so important, and that we have to make time for certain things. And that doesn't mean that you don't work on a weekend, or you don't work 16 hours a day or anything to that effect. That doesn't mean that. It just means that you got to make sure that they all get their piece.
Yeah. Right. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. You've trained and developed people at large scale, to put it bluntly, large scale. What separates someone who builds followers from someone who builds leaders?
Well, and that's the key. I've never really been interested in followers. I always focus my attention on leaders. I always want to build a leader. That's why I'm always trying to give people responsibilities. And teach. I tell them what to do. I show them what to do. I let them try to do it, right? And until they can do it on their own. And then once they get there, I say, okay, now here's your next assignment. Your next assignment is to get one of your guys. You tell them what to do, show them how to do it, watch them do it. You do it and have them do it, and you watch them, right, until they can do it on their own. And so that's what enabled me to actually enjoy the fruit of my labor. is that, I got people taking responsibility. And a lot of people, they do have that imposter syndrome. Oh, I'm not good enough. I don't know enough. And I say, yes, you actually do. Just tell them the truth and just tell them what you do know, and it's going to work. You got any questions? Listen, we're here. But I mean, and so that's really that idea is really developing the leaders, getting them to take responsibility and see, have a bigger vision. That's again why and it all comes into how they see things. When I helped open up the UK, I had one guy over there, key guy, brilliant guy. He ran a major company, and so I talked with him, and he was an entrepreneur. He was the guy dove in, had be first entrepreneur. Had the skills and everything, and he liked what the opportunity was for nutrition in his country. And so when I finished talking to him, I said, okay. I said, Dieter, I said, okay, if you're going to run the country, now listen, we're going to have hundreds, if not thousands, of people in that country building a business. But I talked to him like he was the only guy, even though he wasn't. I said, Dieter, if you're going to run the country, you can't run it by yourself. So tomorrow, I want you to bring me, 5 generals who are going to help you run the country. And he said, okay, be here tomorrow morning at 10:30. I got there the next morning. 4 people were there, Richard, William, and Edmund. And I went through the exact same thing with them, giving them the vision, product plan, purpose, vision. And then when I finished with them, I said, okay, if you guys are going to run the country, you're going to need your captains. So what I want you to do is go out and get your captains. And that Friday night, 7:30, Kensington Heights Hotel downtown, they brought 23 other individuals. Those 5 brought 23 individuals. And then when I finished with them, I said, okay, you guys are going to run the country. Now, they didn't know any better. They weren't aware of all the other hundreds of people, but they just knew that they were going to be my team, my leaders. And so I gave them my country vision, not just a friend vision, not just a city vision, but a country vision, right? And that's what we did. And I mean, and it was just amazing. And he today is, one of my top producers. He's in the top 1% of the 1% wow. in our company.
Well, let's assume that many entrepreneurs are not like Dieter, and they're more like they struggle to let go because they believe no one can do the job as good as they can. And how does a leader build a team that can succeed without them, right? How do you, it sounded like you didn't have to convince Dieter very much. He's like, yep, okay, it makes sense. But he's a little bit of a unicorn in terms of entrepreneurial mindset. How do you get them to let go? That's hard. I remember going through that myself.
It is hard, and there's the old saying, there's PE and there's OPE. Okay. You can learn from personal experience or other people's experience.
Right.
And I just tell them, I said, listen, if you want to do that, that's great. Your choice, your business, you choose. But PE is much more costly and much more lengthy. OPE, learn from other people's experience. Listen, I can tell you what not to do because I've done it. My road to success paved with failures. Tried that, been there, done that. Don't do it. Let me save you some time.
Yeah.
Right. And so a lot of in doing that was say, listen, you need to turn this over to them because I need you over here.
Right.
You have bigger things to do. And so that's that idea of constantly building their confidence, building their image, and creating value for them, that they have bigger, better things to do. And that's what we did, because eventually then we ended up going to Germany and then, Belgium and then South Africa and bounced around the world. But your little guys though, the little guys, they just start. They just start, and it may just take them longer, but they can make it.
Tell me about this right here. Maximize You. What's that about?
One of my mentors, and by the way, that would be something that I would suggest every entrepreneur. I don't think it's an option. I think it's a necessity to find a mentor who has succeeded in being the kind of person that you want to be, and has the kind of character that you want to have, and that's had the kind of success that you want to have, even if it's not in your industry, right? But find a mentor, who's had the experience. And that made a huge difference for me. And so one of my mentors, he come up to me and he said, Denny, he says, you built this organization, 250,000 people. 300 people making the top 1% income bracket. He said, what did you do? And I said, I learned to follow, a lot of concepts and principles that makes things work. And he said, what are they? And I said, well, there are a lot of them. He said, make me a list. So I said, okay. So I went home and I made this list, and I had a whole bunch of them, but I reduced it down to about 45. And I said, these are the principles that I learned to follow. And this is where the guy who's not a Dieter, who's just, a mom and pop, a Joe tow truck driver or whatever it might be, or, friends of mine have just gotten out of jail with their, ankle bracelet still on, who's looking to start a business because they can't get a job, they're going to start their own, right? These principles are principles that work for everybody. It doesn't make any difference what your background, your education, your experience, or anything else. These principles work for everybody, every culture, every person, every philosophy. They work. You just have to follow them. And so anyway, so I sent him this list, and he looks at me and he said, Denny, he said, I think you have a book there. And I just laughed at him. I said, Bob, I flunked English twice. And he said, no. He said, listen, you've been teaching these things for, 4 decades. And I said, yeah. He said, just write a chapter on each principle. And I thought, what you did, how you did it. I said, that's easy. I got the outlines. I've already done all this stuff because that's what I teach. And he said, okay. He said, we'll just make them in chapter form. And so we did it in, and we got it edited, and there it is. So, and these principles, what I discovered about halfway through was the fact that they seem to fall into 6 categories: purpose, okay, making the decisions, okay, and then personal development, becoming the person necessary to fulfill the purpose, and then mindset, setting my mind on the things that are going to help me accomplish that purpose. That eliminates the distractions. Mindset is simply is what you have your mind set on. So I set my mind on those things. And then, of course, if you're going to work in business, you got to deal with people. So I developed people skills. And when you develop the people skills, that will move you into leadership. And by the way, leadership is, especially for new reluctant entrepreneurs, it's not as difficult as you think. Leadership is simply 3 things. It's knowing what to do next, knowing why it's important, and then how to take the current resources to solve the problems at hand. That's it. Listen, that's you. That's every leader. That's what they do. They know what's next, they know why it's important, and they can take the current resources to solve the problems at hand. And there you go. And by the way, did you know there's only 2 problems?
No,
it seems like there's thousands of problems. There's only 2 problems in any business. I don't care what industry. There's only 2 problems: a knowing problem and a doing problem. We simply have to know what to do and then do what we know. That's it. So just figure it out. Listen, we got everything available to make that happen. Yeah. And so, and then of course, it's just keeping everything in balance. So those are the 6 steps. And I just teach them how to do those things. Most people want to change. They just don't know how to.
Yeah. Speaking of perspective, I'm going to ask you the final question because we're about out of time. How did you define success when you were driving that school bus? And how do you define success today?
Well, I don't really remember thinking about how I would define success.
Or maybe when you first stepped into the Herbalife world, when you first got, your first big boy job, that had the potential to make you money. How did you define success then? What did it look like?
Success
and now?
In those early years, the success was to be able to reach the highest position in the company and to be one of the top producers. Say that would have been success.
All right.
But I've learned since then, and after I learned this, I've taught it and I teach it heavily and I make a strong emphasis on it. Real success is simply living life according to your values. If you live life according to your values, that gives you a success, something to put into your tool belt that will allow you to make a bigger difference on your generation. But most people look at success as a goal. I say, listen, if success is your goal, change it. Success isn't the goal. Okay. Influence is the goal. Influence to the point of impact. Because think about it, I mean, you can accumulate all the position, the possession, and the power. My initial thinking of what success was. You can accomplish that. But I discovered in 1985 that it can all disappear in 3 months.
Right.
So it can all disappear. But when you influence somebody to the point of impact, it can never be taken away, and it lasts forever. And so that's what I tell people. The goal isn't the accumulation of position, possession, and power. The goal is to be able to the number of people that you've been able to touch and impact, and that's where the legacy's left. They don't care about your toys. Nobody on their deathbed says, "Hey, bring me my toys and trophies."
Yeah.
Bring me the people that I've touched or have touched me. That's success.
That's great. For my audience, if you're watching this on YouTube and you want to get more information about Dennis's company and Maximize You and the book and all of that, look down here where it says See More. It's right there. And click on that and information on how to get in touch with Dennis through his company and information about the book and all the things he does, the speaking gigs he does, the keynotes he does, all that stuff will be right there. And if you're listening to this on your favorite podcast app, don't do it while you're driving. We don't want to lose any subscribers, at least not that way. When it's safe to do so, look at that podcast app and all that information will be there as well. Dennis Dowdell, thank you so much for sharing your history, your journey, and your wisdom with me and my audience. I really appreciate it. I was really looking forward to this conversation, and you did not disappoint. Thank you for being here, and thanks for all the work you do to help people in their business journey, but probably well beyond that as well. So thanks for everything you do. You certainly have been paying it forward for decades, and you're a talented speaker. I've watched several of your presentations, and for those who need to feel inspired, I highly recommend check Dennis out. And I don't say that often for my guests because I don't want to get one guest mad at me for promoting another guest. But the words you say, I can tell coming through, kind of coming out the other side as a entrepreneurial survivor and learning a few things that I could have learned a whole lot of things much sooner had I been listening to someone like Dennis earlier. So you can do it the easier way or the hard way. Both are hard, but there's hard and hardest. And, we talk about good and best and, great. There's also hard and hardest. And it's always going to be hard, but it can be less hard if you look at people like Dennis who have been through it, who have counseled thousands of other people and heard all the stories. He can start getting a pretty high level of altitude and perspective that comes with altitude. So thanks for doing what you do. Thanks for sharing what you do with me and my audience. I truly enjoyed all parts of this conversation.
Thanks so much, Mike. And I'm just so glad that you have made the commitment to be able to bring insights from thought leaders from around the country and around the world to help people. We all need encouragement. We all need help. And thanks for your help and encouragement for me. I appreciate it.
Well, I appreciate you as well. All right, here's some final thoughts. Dennis's story is a reminder that success does not always begin with confidence, credentials, or a perfect plan. Sometimes it begins with uncertainty, with an unlikely starting point, and with the willingness to grow into the person the opportunity requires. What stands out about Dennis's journey is not just the size of the organization he helped build, but the emphasis he places on personal development as the foundation for leadership. Before we could lead a team, grow a business, or influence others, we first have to do the harder work of leading ourselves. For entrepreneurs, that is an important lesson. We often focus on strategy, sales, systems, and growth. And of course, all those things matter. But Dennis reminds us that the business will often reflect the person leading it. If the leader is unwilling to grow, the business eventually reaches a ceiling. His message is simple but powerful. Maximize yourself first. Develop your mind, your discipline, your character, and your ability to serve others. Because in the end, entrepreneurship is not just about what we build. It's about who we become while building it. Now, that's a wrap. Thanks for being part of our Reluctant Entrepreneur family. We've been very busy recording future episodes with fascinating guests, so be sure to subscribe to get notified when new episodes drop. If you're an entrepreneur or know someone who would make a great guest, we'd love to hear from you. Visit reluctantentrepreneur.podcast.com where you can apply or recommend a guest or just learn more about the show. And a couple of shameless plugs. I've started a new series under the Reluctant Entrepreneur brand. The new series is called Reluctant Lessons, Where Businesses Went Wrong. On this series, we dig into high-profile business failures and the story behind it all. So far, we've profiled Rubbermaid, Kodak, Blockbuster, BlackBerry, and DeLorean Motor Company, but many more are coming. Check those and other episodes out on this channel. And if you're interested in my book, The Reluctant Entrepreneur, Anatomy of a Business Startup from Uncertainty to Unstoppable, it's available in paperback and Kindle on Amazon and as an audiobook on both Audible and Amazon. And to everyone listening or watching, if you find yourself stepping into entrepreneurship, whether by choice or by circumstance, remember this. Sometimes the path we never planned becomes the journey we were meant to take. Thank you so much for being here. I truly appreciate all of you, and I'll see you again soon.